Good morning. My name is Daniel Oates. Work for Flintco here in Austin, 21 years with the company. Really love construction. Really love building things with my hands. Really love seeing buildings built. Love seeing people enjoy the fruits of our labor when jobs are finished. But that comes with a cost, right? This is a tough business, and everybody has to pay their dues to see the fruits of their labor. About a year and a half ago, we had an idea to sit down and have a podcast, so I'm super excited to be here today, talking a little bit about something near and dear to all of our hearts, and that's keeping a positive, upbeat mental health so you can be on top of your game at all times. It's something near and dear to our hearts because this business chews people up, spits them out, and people walk away from this business every day because of the stress. But this business is great, and it builds great people. There's great pay inside of it, and it can really be a wonderful time if you're a part of a great team. We've got super excited. I got one of my good buddies here, Mr. Kevin Grimwood. We've been friends 9 or 10 years now. Kevin works for Acumen Performance Group, which is a wonderful group of gentlemen that have been affiliated with Flintco for the last 10 years. These folks helped us write our ethos, which all of our employees stand behind. These folks have trained us. They've taught us about courage under fire. They've taught us about decision making. And Kevin, man, I'm really glad to have you here today. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up at APG and kind of your history as a special operator for a Navy SEAL platoon.
Right on. Thanks, Dan. So I was a SEAL from 2005 to 2015. I started working with you guys when I was still an instructor, in fact. Through that, I was at war my whole career. All my buddies were at war, so it particularly relevant to this topic, some of the trauma that came out of that. So moving from the SEAL teams into the civilian world, I actually also started a construction company, a small construction company that I ran in San Diego for 6.5 years. And interestingly enough, I would say that the kind of day-to-day grind and burn in construction was even more elevated. It was more well-managed in the SEAL teams. But as it's a business and your bottom line is kind of driven by how productive you are, it's one of those kind of high-pressure industries, as I learned the hard way as well, building my own company.
Sure.
So I ended up experiencing a significant amount of burnout, going through the process of learning to be a business owner, managing a staff of people and trying to manage their health as well and their productivity. Ultimately, that ended up causing strain in my personal relationships. I went through a serious breakup, and then I decided I needed to kind of shift gears and change. And so the timing worked out about the time that I realized I needed to close up shop and move on to something new. I'd been working with Mark and Bill and you guys for years, and they were busy enough that they needed a third partner, so I came on a little over 2 years ago now as a partner with those guys. And we focus primarily on human performance, but as the curriculum has developed over the past decade, a lot of that has shifted towards mental performance and therefore mental health, because that is a major contributor to how a person composes themselves, how they can focus at work, how they can stay in the game.
Yeah, so that's one of the first questions I wanted to unpack was really, how do we define mental health, right? There's so many different thoughts, parameters, different things that go into what creates your mental health, how it stays healthy, how it declines. I want to be perfectly clear, we're not talking about mental illness here, right? There's a challenge understanding what health is versus illness. We're talking about mental health. So how would you define mental health just in your own words? In Kevin's words, how would you define it?
Yeah, interestingly enough, that's something I've been trying to define recently, writing a new curriculum, and it seems to me that mental health in general is just management of your own headspace, right? And so that is finding balance between work and recovery, relaxation, family time, learning how to shift gears between the two. It ties in physical health as well, how you manage relationships in your life. a lot of disciplines come along with it. So we could get into like coping mechanisms or healthy activities that, promote a more healthy, I guess, mindset. So you'll hear people talk about like the difference between like a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And there are various things we can do throughout our day to kind of shift ourselves deliberately from one to the other. But oftentimes we find ourselves sitting in a fixed mindset. So
I think you hit the nail right on the head with your definition. I took some time to look it up online and found several different definitions. The first one being a person's condition with regard to psychological and emotional well-being, which I think you hit on. We also read about a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, realize their abilities, to learn well and work well and contribute to their community. So we're here today to talk a little bit more about that. We're here today to explore a little bit more about that. Maybe what can we do to keep our mental health, keep our mental headspace clear so we can remain in the game, so that we can remain engaged when we're at home with our friends and family, engaged while you're at work, or even engaged when you're working out in your community or serving in your community one way or another.
Right. It's interesting you bring up community as well, because that's been a theme in all the research I've been doing. One thing that seems to be generally agreed upon among psychologists is that the sort of pecking order for happiness is community, then relationships, and then personal health. But that the community you're surrounded by tends to drive the other two.
So tell me a little bit about their research, because I'm trying to think about what the world would tell you is important to maintain your mental health, whether that's status, money, the car you drive. Are those the things that make you happy, or is it truly what you're finding in your research?
No, I mean, there's been broad studies. I wish I'd come prepared to cite some of them specifically, but I'm sure we've all come across some of them that even reference other nations that are at a poverty level, but have happier populations than America, for example, where we tend to be kind of work forward and possession driven, where our car is important, where our house is important, as opposed to our relationships with our family, or our relationships with our spouse, or our community, whether that's a church, a community center. So
when you talk about community, tell me what you would consider community.
Well, so coming from the SEAL teams, that's one of our strengths. There's a lot of things we do well. There's a lot of things we do wrong. One of the things we do exceptionally well is we have an incredibly strong community. So, in fact, to the detriment of our families sometimes. Bear in mind, we're kind of young guys and we're very, very devoted to that job. But oftentimes you'll hear people talk about how, or you'll hear spouses talk about how they wish they could be as close as we are with one another in a platoon. But we've built this culture where we are more or less a family at work, where everybody is kind of minding the health of one another. You treat everybody like your brother. And so we all have our finger on the pulse of kind of how life's going. We check in with one another. Bottom line is we have to go fight together. And so these are people you care about their well-being. And so it's kind of integrated throughout training, the value of support your team. And in fact, anybody who's watched, for example, like the Discovery Channel Buds Class 2, 3, 4 videos, one of the things they'll see is emphasized in first phase of Buds is that everything is done as a boat crew or as a team, right? Lifting that log, boats on heads, you name it, anything is done as a team. So like these scars on my wrist, those are from logs boring holes in my wrist. My first 2 boat crews and how we quit in their entirety. And it got in my head, something fierce. But they were terrible. They were terrible teammates. When I finally got moved to my 3rd boat crew, it was like night and day difference experience. The mentality in that boat crew was a team mentality, and it made the rest of Hell Week so easy by comparison. While I was going through Hell Week with femoral stress fractures and waterproof bandages on my wrist because I could see my tendons, and that half was actually easier.
Wow.
And it was all really thanks to the group of guys I was with, right? We were comedic. We were like uplifting. We were motivated with one another. And then when we all needed to take a break, like we'd push to win races, and we're like, all right, we're gonna chill for this race. Like, let's just get middle of the pack. But we were all on the same page, kind of managing ourselves, managing our team. And we killed the rest of Hell Week because of it.
And so that's great communication amongst you and the guys on your boat crew for that. The third group you were with, that's incredible. How many people dropped out of your Buds class?
Ultimately, like from classing up to graduating Buds went from 220 to 28.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you're one of the 28.
Yeah.
Man, round of applause for you, dude. That's awesome.
Thanks, buddy.
That's incredible. You know, one of the things at Flintco that we're working on is community as well, right? There's similarities between where a special operator works and where a construction person works, with the high stress levels, with the ability or the need to be able to communicate well, the need to be able to perform well and perform at a high level, because to build a 60-story high-rise, you can't just take 2 days off a week, man. You got to be there every day, 5 days a week, maybe 6 days a week, putting in at least 10 hours, maybe 12 hours a day to make sure that the schedule stays on schedule, to make sure that your people are there, to make sure that they're performing, make sure they're getting work in place so you can meet the next milestone and place the next floor or dry in the building, whatever it might be. And something that we've tried to work on and we're continuing to work on is, as we can always be better, is building that community here, right? And understanding who your people are, right? It sounded like when you were in your first and second boat crew, maybe the guys were in it just for themselves, right? And they're like, oh, well, I'm not having a good day, so these other guys can suck it up and pick up the ends for me, or pick up my slack, right? And that's something here that we're trying to do, is to understand your team and know your team, to know who they are, to understand what their home life is like, to understand, you know, what they like to do for fun, and really get to know them on a personal basis, rather than just hey, I need you to do this for me today, right? More than just a direct report, and all you do is give them direction. So building that community is helping us become a tighter knit team and a ability to perform at a higher level here at Flintco. And also just understanding when you see somebody, if they're off a little bit, right? Just like you were talking about with your third boat crew, it's kind of like, hey man, let's take it easy on this one, right? Let's finish, but let's make sure we do well, you know. And you're able to see that amongst the guys and understand it, right?
Yeah, there's some cognizance of what's going on for each of the guys. Like, you may have two guys in the front of the boat who are just getting hammered by the boat, and you know they're exhausted. They've been putting out, kind of pulling the rest of the boat crew, and you're like, hey, let's tone it down a little bit and then get them swapped out. But you don't really have that awareness unless you've already built that culture of look after your teammate first.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because when we're in this situation, it's sometimes you get somebody that ends up working 10 or 12 days in a row, you know, and you might not realize it till, you know, the Thursday of the second week where they've worked every day for the last 12 days. And it's kind of like, hey man, you probably need to take some time off, or you want to leave today at noon, like we can handle it this afternoon. And I think having the wherewithal and the cognizance, like you said, to say, man, that guy's really been putting in the effort, the discretionary effort. They're really helping push the team forward. It's time for them to take a little time off. Right? This business for years and years has been a, suppress your feelings and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and you got to be the first one here and the last one to leave. And, you know, that's what burns people out.
No doubt. Especially if they don't have a why. Kind of bring this back around to what you were talking about initially. You compared to my first two boat crews. I wanted to bring up like some of the unhealthy behaviors that I saw on those. So those guys were constantly making excuses, constantly complaining, talking about how, you know, this is BS. You know, when one of the instructors is kind of getting up our ass, they'd, you know, blame it on the instructors. This is stupid. I don't know why we're doing this kind of thing. Excuses for everything else. Everything else is external. It's something else's fault, right? No real accountability for self. Those are obviously negative behaviors, but what fascinates me is, why does somebody get to that? Like, why don't they have buy-in, right? And so one of the big differences between those first two boat crews and my third boat crew was that these guys were all bought in. They wanted to be there. They wanted to be part of the team. They saw the value in the organization. They saw the value in the SEAL teams, right? Well, one of the first things we did with Flintco, and that you guys embrace and ran with, really was developing that ethos, right, from within, getting everybody's kind of voice involved. Well, who are we, and what are we about, and what do we define as a good teammate? And so one of the ways you guys have been super successful compared to a lot of companies is in your vetting process, because you have an identity. When you're hiring people on, they get a very clear picture of who they're joining and what you guys are about. And as a result, right from the start, you're beginning on the right foot with who you're bringing into your community. To your point on know your people, right? Well, first you have to know yourself. You have to know who it is you want to be as a community or as an organization, so that you can identify the right people and then screen the right people and be honest with them. Be upfront. Hey, this is what we're about. Is this something you think you want to be a part of, right? And I think that's one of the standout things you guys have done. And it's a critical part of building a team with buy-in. So,
yeah, it's hard to believe Flintco was 105 years old when we sat down and wrote that ethos.
Oh, absolutely.
And so you think about being 105 years old, and I think we knew who we wanted to be. I think we knew the kind of people we wanted to hire, but when you write it down, there's accountability to it, right? You have the ethos, it's published, it's got great words in it like mediocrity is unacceptable, right? It's got other things in there that talk about, we're not going to rest on yesterday's successes. It's a privilege to work here, and that we're going to show up every day and we're going to put out and we're going to do the very best we can because it's a privilege to work here. And over the last 10 years after that was developed, I do some of the recruiting at Texas A&M for Flintco, and we recruit from their construction science program. And one of the things that we do when we find somebody that seems like they'd be a high potential employee, it's like we sit down, we interview them, and we say, hey, get on our website and read the ethos. And you see some of them look at it and they're like, oh my gosh. And you see others that are looking at it and they're nodding and they're like, yeah, man, I'm bought in. Hell yeah, this is what I want to do. I want to be a part of this. If this is the way everybody thinks of this company, it's going to be a great place to work. And we appreciate that from the APG folks that pushed us to do that, pushed our executive leadership team 10 years ago to develop that. And it's where we are today, which makes us who we are today.
Oh man, I'm super thankful that we got to be a part of that. I always feel like whenever we get the opportunity to work with somebody like you guys, and really you guys were the first, and in a lot of ways, you became part of the grooming process for our curriculum with other companies, because we got to see just how well it worked for you guys. I think besides the simple satisfaction of seeing a group come together like that, an incredible culture, we grow from it as well. It's proof of concept, right? We hear all kinds of things like goal setting. You talked about putting pen to paper and identifying those specific components of your values. Who do you want to be? Part of the value in goal setting is that we often want to be a certain person, or we want to be a certain type of team, but unless you get specific and focus on that, remind yourself every day. I mean, that's how change comes about, right? Is that constant reminder. It's small little behavioral changes, and if you can put it down on paper and remind yourself daily, and that's how you start your day. I'm going to be a confident leader, but I'm going to be a compassionate leader. I'm going to put my teammates first. I'm going to put my employees first. Understanding that, hey, if my employees are healthy and their morale is up, we're all going to be more productive. Getting to see that come together for you guys was amazing.
Yeah, I still have the reminder here on my little bracelet that I got, 8-9 years ago, the APG logo, and it says team, teammate, self, and that's every day when I get up, I see that, and I think about, hey, what can I do for the team today, right? Let's not think about what's going to help DanO. Let's think about what's going to help the team, what's going to motivate the team to make sure that we can perform on a high level.
It's funny about that. Just a thought. Earlier we were talking about community. And the kind of order of happiness, right? Your community, then your personal relationships, and then individual. And I'm sure some brilliant leaders in our community had that in mind when they put that together, but really it was more of a mantra for us. I didn't draw that connection until probably like the last 5 years that, hey, happiness actually starts with your team or with your community, whatever community that is. Just fascinating correlation that kind of came into play with this whole mental health thing.
A couple minutes ago, you talked about fixed versus growth mindset. Can you expand on that a little bit more and educate me a little bit about what each of those are and how they play into your mental health?
Yeah, so a fixed mindset, man, this is a long one. First off, there's a great book on this called Mindset that I cannot remember the author at the moment, but incredible book that I went through and realized just how many fixed mindset habits I have. However, a fixed mindset is kind of the lack of ability to defer to other people. It also includes complacency, comparison. So somebody with a fixed mindset, as opposed to focusing on performing as well as they could, educating themselves, preparing themselves as best they can, they might get trapped in comparing themselves to their neighbor or their peer or their coworker and basing their performance off of who's sitting next to them. Well, that might help if they're a very, very good performer, but it's still an unhealthy way to look at things because maybe they're grossly outperforming you, right? And so then it's intimidating. You lose confidence because you're just in a different part of the learning process. Maybe they've been learning about their job for a long, long time. Whereas a growth mindset would focus on, hey, this is a person I'd like to embody. Well, how do I go about doing that? Okay, what does this guy or gal do? How do I get educated? How do I learn the skills needed to operate at this level, right? And so fixed versus growth mindset is really, in a sense, it's open-mindedness at like its most basic level.
So when you think about fixed mindset, you think about the guys that were on Boat Crew 1 and Boat Crew 2?
Absolutely.
Yeah, not really willing to grow a little bit and put out a little bit more to help the team.
So a great example of this, on the logs, you've gotten a chance to do the log PT, in fact, didn't you? So we're all lifting this log together, and my first two boat crews were terrible, hence the holes in my wrists. Obviously, they didn't want to pick it up.
Yeah.
So they were so focused on their pain, their suffering, that they lost sight of the bigger picture that, hey, if we all lift together, this thing's really not that heavy. It's not so bad. But because they couldn't work as a team, they couldn't see that bigger picture. They were more focused on oneself. They were unable to grow. That became an impossible task in their mind. And the longer they stayed at it, the more impossible it became. And in fact, at one point, our boat crew was so bad, they put us on this log they call the lie detector. They'd taken a log and chopped it up and then connected the pieces with a small chain. And then each guy is on their own section. And suddenly two sections, me and another guy were locked out holding our log up, and these other guys were struggling. And I don't even think it was because they were weaker per se. I think they were just weaker minded at that point. They were defeated, and they got put on this log, and just the act of being put on the log revealed their vulnerability, because they'd been sitting there living with guilt and shame because they knew they weren't being part of the team, and that had just been compounding over a day or two. That's the kind of cycle that can put somebody into a mental nosedive where they're undermining themselves. Where somebody with a growth mindset from the get-go, who's just like, hey, I'm going to put out as hard as I can. I'm going to do this job as well as I can. And right here, I just need to do it right here, right now, and this will be over. And I need to do it for my teammates. They'd get through that just fine, just like the rest of us.
Yeah, and we've all worked with those people. You've all worked with the ones that have a fixed mindset, the ones that will complain, or the ones that complain about, oh, so-and-so got a different company truck. I can't believe his is four-wheel drive. Oh, I can't believe, I got the older computer. Or I can't believe that, this guy gets more vacation than I get, right? And everybody's got a different set of parameters when they join the company, right? Everybody creates their own deal, and maybe if you weren't as vocal when you were creating your deal, you can you get stuck in that fixed mindset, and working with those folks can be tough. It can be tough to work with somebody that's constantly complaining, and all it really takes is one person to drag the team down.
Absolutely. And something else you mentioned in there is kind of what's behind it is this idea of looking behind you. Those people are looking behind them. They're looking at the past and they're saying, well, this is how it's always been, or this is what I've seen before. And they're focused on that and drawing the conclusion that whatever comes is going to be the same as it was before. And so in that sense, they're very fixed in place, right? Whereas a person with a growth mindset is focused on growth, focused on change, healthy change. And so maybe this, maybe the guy who got the new truck, it has nothing to do with them as an individual. Or maybe this guy deserved a new truck. I don't know. But if that's really a problem, that's something that can just be brought up, right? We've all been in that environment where guys kind of just sit on frustrations and just let that simmer, and it builds into resentment.
I think that's what a lot of us were maybe raised to do, is maybe just kind of be able to sit back and just say, hey, whatever you're experiencing that is unfair, it's just got to sit inside of you, right? You've just got to figure out a way to deal with it.
Right.
And the longer that you deal with it, the worse it gets, right? And the more fixed you get, and the more negative you get. And all of a sudden, you begin to drag other people down around you. And I think that's one of the things that we wanted to talk about today, is really when you see somebody that's struggling, or you see somebody that's having issues, or they're stuck in that comparing world, or they're stuck in that fixed world, and they're starting to dive a little bit, like, what can you do? Like, when you have somebody on your team that's doing that, what's a way to help them get out of the funk? What's a way to encourage them to work on their mental health a little bit? Or what can we do as construction folks to help those people and help get them back towards the growth mindset, to the, hey, we're going to work as a team and get our trajectory moving back up?
Man, that's such a great and broad question. Let's get after it. I think this begins with the culture piece, right? We talked about the ethos and building that community. What are we about? And then from that foundation, that's where leadership development is so important, right? It's like being a mother or father. You have to be a good mentor to your children, for your children to develop well and in a healthy environment, right? And so you have to create that healthy environment, and that begins with learning how to be that mentor, learning how to communicate that way yourself. And so if you have leaders that can't balance their own work life, personal life, their own mental wellness, they're going to struggle to provide that kind of environment for their employees. That's one place I think you guys excel, right? You guys have put so much effort into culture and leadership development over the years. I think that's one of the things that makes leadership so strong here, is that they understood that early on and drove to push the envelope and continue growing. So it's like a growth mindset at a corporate level, right?
Yeah, and I think as a leader, we're all challenged to know our people and to see and to be able to notice when they start that nosedive, right? Because it's just gradual, right? It starts as a little bit, and then all of a sudden it starts piling on, and it gets more pronounced, and all of a sudden, before you know it, you're in that nosedive, and it's kind of like, oh my gosh, how are we going to pull this person out? So I think from my perspective, it's learning who your people are, learning what they like to do, encouraging them when they feel like or when I can see the nosedive beginning, encourage them like, hey man, take Friday off.
Right.
Get your Friday off, go out, get your head clear. If you want to go camping, if you want to go hiking, if you like to golf, if you like to walk your dog, whatever it might be, it's like, hey, take some time and do that, right? Go figure out why you got into this business, right? Because everybody got into this business for a reason, right? And for me, I started doing mission work at a young age, like 6th grade, went on my first mission trip down on the border of Texas and Mexico, and we worked on this lady's house, fixed her garage, repainted it, that kind of stuff. And when I saw that lady walk out, it's like, and the smile on her face, I was like, dude, this is what it's all about, right? Serving others,
Heck yeah.
helping other people. And sometimes when you get stuck in that nosedive, you forget that. you forget it, and maybe you're thinking like, well, I took this job because it's worth more money, or I get a company truck, or I get this, or I get that. And it's kind of like, you go back to your why. And I go back and I think about seeing that lady in the 6th grade, and I go back and think about seeing all these people's houses that I've worked on in Texas and, in the Appalachian Mountains, different mission trips I've went on, and remember their smiles and remember their gratitude and how thankful they were for us serving them. And it's kind of like, and then remember back to my first jobs here at Flintco, right? We delivered Texas State baseball for the first baseball game, March 2nd, 2009. And the University of Texas had never come to Texas State to play baseball because their facilities weren't good enough. Well, Texas State said, we're going to build a state-of-the-art facility. We're going to get UT down here to play some baseball. And as $9 million worth of work in about 115 days is what it took to get that stadium built. And as we stood up there and watched the Longhorns run out on the field and Texas State run out on the field, I was standing there with the athletic director, Larry Tice, and he's like, we made it happen, Daniel. Like, we had a goal when we started this to have the Longhorns want to come play here, and now we're playing here. And all of a sudden it was like, the late nights were worth it. The night before it was 2:00 in the morning and I'm putting in, cover plates up in the suite or whatever, but it was totally worth it, right? And you have to remind yourself sometimes why you got into this, because you like to see that gratitude and that gratefulness from somebody from enjoying the fruits of your labor.
And that's awesome. It puts a grin on my face. It also brings up a question, because I love how you described that. You started off talking about how you can become burned out, and how you have to remind yourself, and then you kind of hinted at community. And so I guess my question to you is, when you're experiencing those stressful moments, those kind of prolonged peaks that just come with construction, what was it in your life that sort of brought you back to being able to focus on your why, right? Because like oftentimes I've experienced burnout, and I'll even kind of know why I'm into something or why I should do something, but it's still hard to do it. When you found yourself in those moments where you're exhausted, burned out, stressed out, overwhelmed, anxious, what have you, where did you kind of derive your strength from? What kept you aligned?
Man, that's a great question, because depending on where I was in my career would probably depend on what that was. More recently, my kids are a little bit older, right? They're 14 and 16 now. They're almost self-sufficient, which is great. As a parent, it's really great to see that. But recently, my wife and I, we serve at our church. We serve as the youth director or youth group sponsors, and every Sunday night from 5 to 6:30, we meet with the youth and we hang out. We tell them about Jesus and help their faith grow. And it's kind of like, construction's great, but construction is not who I am, right? Who I am is I'm called to be a guy that's going to serve other people. And the problems that you withstand during construction are temporary, right? And it's like, no matter how bad it gets, at some point it's going to end. It's going to have to end, right? The job's going to get built. We're going to figure out the problem. We're going to get past it. So for me, it's like I have to disconnect from that, right? I have to leave my work phone on the nightstand, and spend time with my kids, spend time with the kids at church, and really focus on, hey, this is an eternal thing for me, right? Helping these kids learn about Jesus, that kind of stuff. It's kind of like it's going to push these kids into success for the rest of their life the way I feel it is. And then when you come back to work, it kind of puts things in perspective. It's kind of like, yeah, we're going to get there. We're going to be able to get from here to there. Our team's going to be motivated. We're going to figure out the problem. We're going to execute, and we're going to move on with it. I would say earlier in my career, I wasn't as good at it, man. I spent time, I was playing in a poker league. I was on a softball team. And there were, good guys, but we weren't doing good things, right?
Right.
We were out late at night, drinking, having a big time, and it's kind of, we got to the point where my wife just sat me down and was like, dude, something's got to change. Like, you are way too involved in too many things, and you're not dealing with yourself, you're not dealing with your stress, you're not dealing with our family. And she's like, if you're going to continue to live like this, you can do it by yourself. And I was like, huh? What are you talking about? We've been together 14 years, and all of a sudden you're going to give me this ultimatum right now that I can't be the guy that I want to be? Well, I wasn't being the guy I wanted to be. I was being the guy that everybody wanted me to be. They wanted
Right.
fun DanO. They wanted DanO at the softball game. They wanted him at the poker table. And you know, I had to take a minute and really reflect on what I was doing, and if the decisions I were making were life-giving decisions, because they were just taking life from myself and from my family. A week later, I'm sitting in a therapy chair, you know, marriage and family therapist, about 2 miles down the road from our Austin office, talking about what my issues were and why I couldn't deal with my stress. And I think we got to the point where it was like, my way to relieve stress was to just avoid everybody and avoid everything. And whether it was playing poker on Tuesday and Thursday night or softball on Wednesday night, that was what it was, right? That was who I was going to be. That's how I was going to deal with it, and in essence, not deal with it. But sitting down
Right.
down the road here for 6 months, and you know, marriage therapy, talking about, hey, what's the root of all this, and what my guy told me in one of our last sessions was like, dude, you're an adventure seeker. You love to have adventure. Obviously, right? Who plays in 2 poker games and a softball team when you got young kids?
Yeah,
Well,
you and me both.
this guy, right? And so he told me, he said, Daniel, look, dude, you have to find your joy in the journey, whatever the journey is, even if it's a tough job. You've got to find joy in those tough aspects every day, even in those tough conversations, in those tough schedule reviews, and those tough submittal reviews, tough meetings with the owner. Find something in there that makes you smile. And even if it's a small compliment, or even if you compliment the owner and they smile back at you, find something that's going to make you smile during the day. And so from that point in 2016, when my therapist told me that, it's kind of like, that's what I look for now, right? Finding joy in the journey and not be stuck comparing myself to somebody else, not be stuck complaining about the situation I'm in, right? All the problems I have are first world problems, right? Anybody else across the world would laugh at what I consider to be my problem. They're like, oh, really? Yeah, you can hit the faucet every time and water comes out. Oh, and it's hot and it's drinkable. Wow, you've really got problems, bro. You know?
I know that feeling, man. Wow, there's a lot there. I love that. So one of the things I love about that is you kind of started at where you are now, and you kind of described the idea of deriving your strength from having a healthy life outside of work, having an identity.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who's Dan? You
Yeah,
know,
yep.
Not Dan, the construction worker, but who's just Dan. And knowing yourself and being healthy makes you good at construction,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that a lot of that came from healthy relationships with your family, healthy relationships with your community at church,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then an emphasis on finding joy, actually enjoying life, finding reasons to
Mm-hmm.
smile. And yeah, you said you weren't very good at it earlier in your career. So this is a good time, I think, for me to kind of share my transition a little bit. Coming from the SEAL teams, really I was a SEAL the better part of my adult life when I got out in 2015. So, and it's not quite like being James Bond. Really, it's like living in an alternate universe in a closet. And in some ways I was worldly, but in a lot of ways I was very, very naive. So all that to say, there was a lot of adjustment necessary that I couldn't have seen at the time. I mean, I can see it now in hindsight, but it took a good 5 years for me to start to become well-adjusted. And I'd come from this background of just push, right, be a pipe hitter. But the SEAL teams and the military in general at least provide some structure for it. And I had my SEAL community, my SEAL family. So I shifted from that and started my own construction company. And one of the things that happened was I just got wrapped up in the work. You know, everybody often would, you know, assume that my SEAL career was the hard career, but that's not true. I never worked so many hours in my life until I started a construction company. Like earlier, you were describing how it's just kind of everything's work, and you have to get it done. It's all deadlines. And then as an owner and a new business owner, still learning how to build a business, also learning how to manage employees and all of that. There was no Monday to Friday. Monday to Friday was managing these, managing the job sites and managing my crews. And then it would bleed over into Saturday and Sunday, and it sort of took over my life. And so I didn't really have much of a life outside of work. I.e., I didn't have community. I certainly had strained relationships. I was just absent, and as a result, because I was out of that balance, there's this concept I've been reading about recently about that actually applies closely to a training technique we use when we're working on like close quarters combat, and it's about stages of arousal, they call it in psychology, and in various stages of arousal, you can operate or you can perform, faster, more accurately, you're more agile. But you can only maintain that for a period of time. And then you need to step it down to a lower stage of arousal. And kind of a simple idea of this is there's like the empowered zone, which would be like motivated, confident, excited, focused, efficiency driven. So this is like kind of optimal work zone. If it's grind time on a job site, this is the zone that you want to be in. But you can only stay there for so long before you need to shift to restorative, which is what you described you got better at as you matured, as you grew, right? And that's like a reflective state of mind. It has a lot to do with gratitude for your family, gratitude for your kids, gratitude for your community. You're able to relax, like truly relax, find some peace in life. You're grounded. And you have to switch between these two, and that's a tool that I just hadn't really learned. It had been imposed on me before that, but it wasn't really something I'd structured in my own life. I can tell you I did it terribly. So what happens when you manage that poorly? So if you operate in that empowered zone for too long, you end up moving over to the distressed zone, and that's where you're overwhelmed, anxious. And as a result, when you maintain that for a while, you'll become resentful or agitated, and then you lose your ability to focus, right? If you stay in restorative for too long, rather than becoming distressed, you never get to perform, and you never get into that kind of motivational, like focused, confident state of mind. You switch over to like this victim zone, and that's where you tend to get depressed, complacent, tired, burned out, defeated or shut down, right? Also, if you stay in that distress zone, so let's say you were that performer initially, super confident, focused entirely on work, then you end up moving yourself over to distressed, and you become overwhelmed and anxious and overworked and all that. You're going to end up in this victim role. Ultimately, you're going to end up depressed, tired, and burned out. And then that ends up causing, that's not a good place to be mentally. You lose your self-confidence. You're not focused on work, so you can't be productive. You're unhappy, right? And that strains relationships. It then affects your physical health as well. And then one of the things that you described in your younger years were ineffective coping mechanisms, right?
Yeah.
So like ineffective coping mechanisms would be like food, drugs or alcohol, yelling or aggression, zoning out, sex, complaining, like any of these kind of things that we do to get a serotonin bump for a short term, but doesn't actually create a good habit, right? And so I kind of found, I didn't have a whole lot of time for fun, but I think that's one of the things I was terrible at. I couldn't balance it, and my coping mechanisms were poor. I wasn't minding my physical health. I wasn't eating well. I was eating, I get off work, I feel super burned out. Guess what sounds really good? Pizza. Pizza and beer sounds great. You see that a lot in construction.
Yeah, you do.
And anyway, it without trying to get too heavy, it put me in a pretty bad downward spiral over the span of 5 years. No question, it was the lowest point in my life. I ended up wrecking a relationship that I was in for 8 years, And I got to a point where I don't think I was at risk of checking out or ending it all. But suicide was something I thought about. And it was more from the perspective of, I don't really care if I'm alive. I mean, I got to that level of unhappy. I was kind of just unfeeling. And I was keenly aware of it. This was a kind of a thing that, a thought that came up a lot, where I was just like, I have no optimism for the next day. And in fact, the next day is going to bring with it a lot of things that I don't want to deal with. And I don't really see a way out. And now, part of the reason why I'm so focused on this mental wellness thing is looking at what it finally took to get out of that, was developing some things that I had neglected, that you described as the things that kept you aligned with your work and your career. And I realized I'd completely separated myself from other people, and I let my relationships deteriorate. I was part of no communities because I didn't make any time for them. I didn't take the time to do things like hike, read, work out, just healthy behaviors. All I had were ineffective coping mechanisms, drinking, food, partying, or binge watching Netflix.
Right.
And working myself into the ground. And at that point, I was also a completely ineffective leader. I couldn't create a healthy culture at my place of work either, right? How could I lead and mentor these guys? I tried.
It's really hard.
And I tried. It was almost more emotionally disconnected and factual. Like, I understand these are the things I'm supposed to hit as a leader, because I'd been a leader for a long time. So I think I actually was quite a good leader when I was in the SEAL teams. But one of the things that undermined that was I didn't really learn how to manage my own mental wellness. And I learned sort of the hard way getting out of the military. It was like drinking from a fire hose while I'm also trying to ambitiously build a company. And it turned out I just wasn't equipped for it. I didn't know how to do it yet. And it ultimately put me in this downward spiral. And to get out of that, one of the first things I had to do was start being a part of communities. Like, Mark and Bill, my partners, we're our own little community, and then we have, a group of, I'd say about 20 other operators that we bring out on trips. We usually have 10 or so when we do our event every year in Tulsa. And so that kind of getting more involved with those guys and then being a little bit more open about where I was at helped a lot, just to be able to kind of get that out, and then to hear from them like, yeah, man, I kind of went through similar things getting out. That was like, all right, I'm not isolated. This isn't unusual. Well, how do I fix this? And what's funny is that we can get into a number of ways that I went about fixing it, but I almost want to say, to some extent, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was repairing my absence from community, and then repairing personal relationships. I started spending more time with friends, and that they were uplifting. They gave me the reason to do the healthy things that I needed to do to fix my career, to fix my mental state. And anyway, I've been kind of droning on here for a while. One other thing that kind of a theme you just gave me was, before this we were talking a little bit about, what are some of the indicators that somebody is in this kind of state of mind. And I actually believe now it's the absence of certain indicators that are more indicative of somebody who might be falling into this kind of rut, falling into this downward spiral. If you don't see them being an active participant in a community, if you don't see them cultivating a healthy family life, or spending time with their kids, or being able to connect with the people at the office, those are indicators that they are disconnected. And that is what I was. I was disconnected from everything. And that's kind of that is the defining feature for me when I think back about how I felt. I felt disconnected from the world, disconnected from life. And I think because I have great siblings, I have some great people in my life. I was never actually going to take my own life because I couldn't put that on them. But I didn't care about living, and that was directly correlated to this idea of just being disconnected.
So what was the turning point, you could say? Awesome story, though. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
being vulnerable to share that. But what was the turning point when you were at the bottom, when you said, man, something's got to give. I've got to get back to that reflective state of mind and not in this victim mentality, or back into the empowered state where you're performing at a high level? Was there something you experienced, or something when your friends said, or your sibling or parents or somebody that helped pull you out?
I think for me, it was mostly this idea that I've always wanted to be the strength for my family, for my siblings, for the guys I work with. That's always been important to me, that I was a good team player, and that's how it's just who I wanted to be. I felt like we kind of defined by what we contribute to the people around us, right? And I found myself in this position where I had lost most of the things that were important to me. I lost my partner. My business was successful, but it was a time that was easy to be successful in construction. I could have been much more successful than I was, and I more or less just kind of let a lot of profits go in the last couple of years with some just because I was so burned out and bad practices. I lost a lot of close friendships, and I started to realize just how much I had lost because of me, because of my choices, because of the things that the ways I didn't grow, the ways I hadn't matured. And so I guess at some point I just realized I needed to take responsibility for it, and that, hey, if I want these things in my life, if I want to be happy, if I want to have people to be happy with, I have to start making some changes. But maybe the first thing that reminded me of that was spending time with those people I cared about. And that created the value for me. It was like the reminder that, hey, this is something I want. This is important to me. These people make life worth living. So I need to start making some changes.
Right. There's something more than just work, right? There's something more than just work, right? And this construction business is crazy, right? You're 4 times more likely to die of suicide being in the construction industry, right? There's 1,000 people a year that die on construction job sites because they're not tied off correctly, or they fall off a ladder, whatever it might be. But 5 times that many die from suicide, which it's unbelievable. And you really touched on something great here a minute ago when you talked about the absence of indicators, right? And that's something that I keyed in on, because when something like this happens, or where you're impacted by that, or one of your friends dies by suicide, you can look back and say, oh, we missed that, or this was going on, or this was going on. And it's important that we're educated on knowing what the indicators are, but also the absence of indicators, right? When you come in and you're talking to one of your direct reports on Monday, and we're like, hey, how was your weekend? They're like, I didn't do anything. Just sat around. It's like, hey, well, next weekend I'm going to invite you to do something, right? That's on me. I'm going to invite you to do something. If you're so down or you're so worn out, you don't have a group of friends or can't find your group of friends, I'm going to help try to solve that problem, right? So you don't get into that situation where you're dealing with this, or you're looking back going, oh my gosh, how did I miss that? How was I not keyed into that, right? And Flintco just rolled out this program a couple months ago about a mental health first aid kit, right? And we're developing this training for leaders and superintendents and the safety personnel to be able to recognize those things, to be able to recognize when somebody's withdrawn, to coach them on how to approach your direct report, right? A lot of the times if you see somebody that's kind of in a funk, you don't want to talk to them. Am I right?
Absolutely.
And you see them and you're like, man, I don't even know how to approach them. What am I going to say to them? Am I going to set them off? And they're going to be mad at me, right? So that's some of the training that we're rolling out, to be able to recognize that, to be able to approach the employee or your peer or your direct report, talk to them about it, and get the right resources to help help get them back into that reflective state or to that empowered zone to say, hey, look, we're done playing the victim, right? Let me help you get from here to there, and let me help you with the training I've received and these coping mechanisms to help you get from here to there, because generally it's something simple, right? It's just something that's out of balance, right? And you recognize that when you started to have your relationships fall apart. The same thing happened to me when my wife was like, you're going to do this by yourself if this is the way you want to live. And it's like, oh my gosh, I've completely forgotten what my role was as a father with young children and a working wife, right? And it's humbling. It's heartbreaking at the same time to realize you've gotten there, but at the same time, it was a simple fix. For me, it was like, hey, there's a little course correction, and let's refocus on what we can do, right? And soon after that, Peter, our CEO, approached me about going to a job in Mexico. And I was like, what a perfect way to disconnect. What a perfect way to drop all these things I've been involved in. And we moved and worked on this job in Mexico for 2 years, and our family we completely grew together, right? We lived in Austin for 12 years, and it's like, when we get to Arizona, we didn't know anybody. We had no idea. Like, Yuma, Arizona, are you serious? Like, that's not the end of the world, but you can see it from Yuma. Like, you can see the end of the world from Yuma.
Yeah.
Right? And our family, we had this great experience of all these new adventures together, and all of a sudden, my wife and I are reconnected, and the kids and us are reconnected, and we're enjoying life together. And it's like, what a life-saving decision that was for us. And God, thanks, Peter, for asking me to go, right? And it really, when we moved back, it was kind of like, hey, we're going to keep all this stuff at arm's length, right? I'm going to stay connected here with what the family's doing. I don't play softball anymore. I don't play poker anymore, right? The bank account thanks me for that, as does my wife. But it's been life-giving decisions for us, which has really increased our quality of life as a family.
You were just making a super good point in there, I think. Before that end point, you're talking about how to identify when you see this lack of indicators in others and being willing to say something, even though our natural tendency is not to. I think what we're talking about is the idea of individuals becoming leaders. It doesn't always have to be the boss, We can all be leaders in this. That's something we have to teach, we have to cultivate within an organization. But I think part of the awareness of this is teaching everybody to, hey, when you see that guy or gal, lift them up. Because that's what it took for me, was this idea of, friends and family kind of seeing where I was at, seeing how withdrawn I'd become, and kind of forcing me to be a part of it again. And I think in our careers, we can be those leaders, those mentors for our peers. And sometimes, sometimes they're going to be that for us, but when we see them in that position, we have to be that for them.
Kevin, man, that was awesome. That was a really good point, talking about leadership at every level, right? That's something that our ethos demands of us as Flintco employees also, right? Everything doesn't lie on the vice president in the office. It's up to all of us to know our people, to know our peers, and be able to lift them up when they're getting dragged down. Man, this has been a great conversation, Kevin. It's awesome to have you in here today. I appreciate your dedication. Gosh, thank you for your service. My goodness, 10 years as a SEAL Special Warfare Operator. I'm beyond grateful to have you here today, man. I'm glad you're my friend, and thank you for your time.
Oh, thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me. This has been an awesome discussion. We didn't have enough time I think we could have kept rattling on this one, because it's just fascinating and empowering, but this was great. Thanks for having me, man.
Yep, we'll see you on future episodes, bro. Thanks.
Yeah.
It's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to ask for help. If you are struggling with suicidal thoughts, or you think someone you know is, please don't wait. Call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org. To learn how to get support for mental health, drug, and alcohol issues, visit findsupport.gov. To locate treatment facilities or providers, visit findtreatment.gov or call their national helpline at 800-662-HELP. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.